What's up, little baby? Do you want to learn how to develop recipes too? No, he doesn't care. Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I'm gonna be totally honest with you here. A few years ago, I had no idea how to write recipes. And now, for over a year now, I've had my own blog and I've been baking and sharing recipes and baking tips with you, and I've learned a lot along the way. When I first started my baking journey a couple years ago, I would look at all these amazing cookbooks and bloggers and just really love all their recipes. But I had no idea how they thought of flavor combinations, how they wrote recipes, and I was just kind of dumbfounded by how to even start. When I searched online for different resources and tips on how to start writing recipes, I really kind of drew a blank and I didn't really find a lot out there. So I wanted to share with you my best tips on how to develop and write your own recipes from scratch. So in case you're not familiar with my other videos or my background, I attended pastry school at the International Culinary Center a couple years ago, and then I worked as a pastry cook at a restaurant called The Dutch here in New York City. Because of that, a lot of my tips directly apply to kind of pastry recipes in particular, but a lot of these concepts can be applied to savory ones as well. So without further ado, here are some of my best tips and tricks when it comes to developing your own recipes. In order to even get ideas or inspiration for recipes, you first need to do your research. And this is the best part because this means you get to go out and try new foods, you get to peruse through lots of cookbooks, and just find inspiration all around you. I personally love to do this by going to new restaurants or bakeries and just ordering something new off the menu. Order a new matcha lava cake or a really decadent cheesecake and think about the flavor profile. Why did they choose to include lime in that cheesecake? Why does the matcha pair well with the chocolate in the lava cake? Start to think critically about what flavor combinations different chefs use, and then you can kind of jot ideas down and then incorporate them into your own baking. I also love to get inspiration by combing through cookbooks and magazines, or even places like Pinterest, because you can see so many new recipes that you can draw ideas and inspiration from. Whenever I have some spare time, I just like to sit down on my couch and flip through cookbooks, and I'm not necessarily looking for a recipe to try, I'm just looking to see what they have developed, because I don't know when I'm going to be really amazed by something and want to incorporate it into my own baking. I also find it really helpful to think about what fruit is in season during the year, because you really want to work on baking seasonally. So right now we're kind of going into summertime, so a lot of my recipes currently are using things like blackberries or strawberries, just because they're more readily available and taste extra delicious right now. Another super helpful resource that I like to use is a fruit flavor pairing guide, and I developed one on my blog. I'll leave it linked down below in case you want to check it out, but it's a really comprehensive guide that shows you a breakdown of all the different fruits and then what fruits they pair well with, as well as different nuts they pair well with, and other flavors in addition. I actually reference this guide myself when I'm developing recipes because it's really helpful to see everything all in one place, and it helps you start to learn like, oh yeah, those flavors do go well together, and then you kind of keep it a mental log in your brain for next time when you're developing a different recipe. Finally, when it comes to baking, honestly, the baking science behind everything is so important. And I didn't understand a lot of this until I went to pastry school. We spent so much time researching and reading our textbooks to learn about why baking soda works differently than baking powder, how different types of leavening work, how, certain cakes get their rise, just all kinds of things are so important. And if you don't understand why these things are happening when you're baking, it's going to be hard to write recipes. Because once you learn that, you know when you're going to use baking soda. You know when you're going to incorporate lemon juice. You know why you can't substitute a certain type of flour for like bread flour, for instance. So I highly recommend doing the research. I actually have a lot of articles listed on my blog that have baking science and tips, and there's lots of really amazing books and articles that you can reference as well. One of my favorite books that goes deeply into this topic is How Baking Works, and I'll leave it linked below if you want to check it out. It's just a great read and it's so informative. After you've done your research, the next step that I like to do is think about how I can give original recipes a bit of a unique twist. And I've done this a couple different ways with my recipes. One of my favorite types of cookies are snickerdoodles, and I thought, why don't I turn them into scones? So I developed an entire snickerdoodle scone recipe by taking kind of my original scone recipe and then adding in different flavors like cream of tartar and cinnamon to give it that snickerdoodle flavor. I also did this by taking one of my favorite Thanksgiving dishes, which was a sweet potato casserole, and I transformed it into a cheesecake, actually into cheesecake bars, because these are my favorite, and this way it's a bit more accessible and just kind of a fun spin. So when you're first starting out making recipes, this technique is one I highly recommend because it's actually pretty easy to do. Just think of different ways you can change things up and give a recipe your own unique spin. When you're doing this though, you don't really need to go crazy. You can just think about adding in unique flavors. Like you could add coriander into shortbread cookies. You could just change up one ingredient here or there and then make it your own. However, when you are writing recipes, if you're pulling from an original one, you need to make sure that you rewrite the instructions in your own words. And they usually say that you should change about 3 ingredients to make it your own. And if you're changing less than that, if you're posting a recipe online or sharing it, just make sure to reference to the original one in the actual recipe itself. And just give credit where credit's due, you know? When you're making recipes, you're going to have to test them a lot. And as a perfectionist, this is really hard for me to grasp, and I still struggle with this, but you're going to fail. And a lot of times when baking, it takes up to like 5 or 6 times, sometimes even more, to get a recipe down, and that's just the way it is, and you need to embrace the process. When I'm making a new recipe, I personally like to make one change at a time, because that way you can pinpoint exactly what effect changing that one ingredient or that one baking component or direction had. If you change lots of things all at once, it's going to be hard to tell what's working and what's not. So to get one step at a time and test the recipe as many times as necessary. When baking, it's also super important to keep in mind that things fluctuate depending on your environment and your altitude and just a plethora of other key factors. So if possible, I recommend testing your recipe in different environments. Try it out in your kitchen and then in your friend's kitchen or your parents', and just make sure that you have consistency every time. Like I said, I'm a closet perfectionist and I'm trying to work on that, but it's just how I am. And one of the hardest lessons for me to learn was I need to grow and adapt from my mistakes. Because when you're testing recipes, they're not going to be perfect every time. You're going to have major flops. For instance, I made choux pastry, just some cream puffs, a couple months ago, and they just were completely raw and horrible. And I'd made them so many times before without problems, but it's just not going to be perfect every time. So accept that that is part of the journey and learn from all of your mistakes. It's really important to learn that all of your ideas aren't going to work out. You might have this amazing idea for a cake that has all these different flavors, and then when you try it, they just don't work well together. And if it comes to that, then just basically take that experience and then move on. You learn that that doesn't work, and now you can use that knowledge and incorporate into your baking going forward. One of my best tips when it comes to recipe development is to keep track of all of your ideas. You never know when you're going to be eating at a new restaurant or just going through a farmer's market and looking at all the fresh produce, and an idea is going to pop into your head. So for me personally, for my blog and my YouTube channel, I like to record all of my recipe ideas, inspiration, and also my content calendar on Asana. And I've been using Asana for several years now. This is totally not sponsored, but I would love if they would sponsor me. But I keep some different boards with all my recipe ideas and inspiration, and it's just so helpful to have them all in one place. Even if you don't have a blog, you can easily do this on the notes section of your phone, or you could even keep like a journal in your bag and just whip it out whenever inspiration hits. But it's just super helpful to keep everything recorded and keep a log of what's, striking your inspiration. I have a surprise guest. They're always so interested in everything I'm doing and they want to get involved. What's up, little baby? Do you want to learn how to develop recipes too? No, he doesn't care. So if you do see him in my video, now you know why. I'm not gonna kick them out. They have full control over my apartment and they rule everything. So that's just the way it is. It's the power dynamic. I also find that when I'm developing recipes, I love to look back over my different old ideas or my journals and see what was inspiring me a couple years ago, because you'll start to see that your inspiration and your thought patterns will change over time as you become an even better baker and an even better recipe developer. But it's super fun to look back on all those old ideas and see how far you've come. So those are all the tips I have. I have tons of other information that I can share about recipe development. So if you did enjoy this video and you want to learn more, please let me know in the comments below and I can make more videos about this for you in the future. And if you're not already following along, I do share new baking tips and recipes every week here on my channel, so make sure to hit that subscribe button down below to stay tuned and see all of my future videos. And if you enjoyed this video, it really helps support the channel if you give it a like. But until next time, happy baking, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!